Carlin says that while some people object to the language he uses, what he objects to is the sanitized euphemisms that have entered our language, euphemisms that only obscure meaning.
Some of these are small examples that, taken as a larger body, make the point a little bit better, because these are trivial things. But there is an example of something that happened in this century to a certain condition, a combat condition, when people can't handle any more combat. In the First World War, back over 70 years ago, that was called shell shock, which is very descriptive, very simple, honest, and direct language. Shell shock. It describes exactly what it is. It almost sounds like guns. In the Second World War, a generation later, they decided to call that battle fatigue. It's twice as long now, 4 syllables, takes longer to say, doesn't seem to hurt. Fatigue is a nicer word than shock. Shell shock, battle fatigue. Then we had Korea in 1950. They called the same thing operational exhaustion. Now the humanity is completely missing from it, and it sounds like something that might happen to your Jeep. And in Vietnam, of course, thanks to the deception surrounding that war, the same condition was called post-traumatic stress disorder. And my point is, if we'd have still been calling it shell shock, maybe Vietnam veterans might have gotten some attention at the time, because the language would have described what was wrong with them instead of describing some psychologist's ideal phrase for taking up space.
One of the things you're very famous for is the 7 dirty words case, and
right.
This is you had a routine about 7 dirty words you can't say on television.
Right.
In 1972, you were arrested for doing this on stage.
Yeah.
And in just a few years later, a radio station in New York, a listener-supported station,
right.
played the routine from the record, and that became a kind of classic obscenity case.
It went to the Supreme Court, yeah.
Yeah. It was a very important case that everybody in radio knows about.
I'm a legal footnote.
And of course, you lost.
I wasn't really an active participant.
Right, I don't mean you personally, but the radio station
They
lost.
did indeed.
Yeah.
The FCC was upheld.
Now, part of what this routine was about was the absurdity of banning words, the absurdity of being so offended by language.
One would think that would be protected speech.
And an example you gave was, and I can't give the full thing, but you said you can say, don't prick your finger, but if you reverse the order of those words, that would be considered obscene.
Right.
Did the judges in the various trials get the point, do you think?
Absolutely not. I don't think they even listened. I'm sure they didn't listen to the record to hear it in its fullest and best context. I'm sure they read portions of the transcript. It's in the interest, I guess, of the white male, religious, corporate, paramilitary state that we live in to control us. And the FCC, of course, has control only over broadcast media. And I guess they found a way to interpret that form of expression differently from the printed word and the spoken word. The argument, which I think is specious, is that because this goes out into the home, that somehow it's going to injure someone morally if it comes through the speaker. They don't take into account the fact that there is an on-off switch on every radio and there is a station selector knob for changing the station. The man who made the complaint, one of these moral commandos, a professional moralist who wants us to live his way, sat in his car with his son and listened to the entire broadcast, and I assume they were not morally degraded in any way. I assume the child has developed in a normal way in spite of listening to that routine. So where is the argument? I don't follow the damage. I don't see where the damage occurs in this language being used.
You know, Lenny Bruce always said that when he was up on obscenity charges, that he wished he could perform the material for the judges, you know, because they were hearing, either reading transcriptions or they were hearing people quote the material.
A cop was doing his act.
Right, that's it. Yeah. And, Bruce really felt, well, if they're going to get what it's about, they have to hear me do it. Did you feel that way yourself? Well,
I feel that the thing was rigged to start with, I mean, I think the outcome was inevitable. But surely it would have been fairer to the process to listen to the recording. And the other thing about it is there was a warning given, there was a disclaimer given by the radio station saying that there'll be language on this next recording which you may find offensive. There was the point made that it was in the context of speaking about protected speech. And certainly in that case, that has to be a redeeming artistic feature, which is one of the tests for obscenity. Of course, they didn't test it for obscenity. They called it indecency and got around the obscenity law in that manner.
Now, you were arrested in Milwaukee in 1972.
Yeah, now that was more for public, what you call it, disorderly conduct. The concert was outdoors, and the concert setting outdoors was in a larger setting of a festival, a summer fest. Mm-hmm. And so the complaint was made on the basis of the fact that the language coming from these speakers flowed out of the concert area into the area of the general public. And the policeman felt that was wrong. I think his idea was, he said there were mothers listening to this, which I don't understand at all. But at any rate, we just waited. As the lawyer told me, he said, we're going to wait a few months on this case until a judge comes around who understands the First Amendment. And apparently in Milwaukee, that took about 6 months.
Did you expect to be arrested? Did you have
No.
any idea this was coming?
Oh, absolutely not. No, and I think it was a spur-of-the-moment decision on the part of one policeman.
And how did they come get you?
Oh, they just came backstage. My wife came out on stage during the show to warn me that they were back there. She came out ostensibly to bring me a glass of water, and it was a large kind of unruly audience and everything, so an interruption like that wasn't particularly damaging to the flow of the show or anything. So she just got me aside and said, there's police backstage and they're going to arrest you. So I went off stage a different way where they weren't waiting. And at that time, I was still a user of illegal substances, and so I got rid of what I had on me, so that the only arrest would be for this spoken violation, and not for something else which they would have loved to catch me doing.
How did you start using, quote, dirty words in your performances?
Well, I always felt that I didn't want to be denied a significant portion of the language, significant not numerically, but in terms of impact in speech. I just felt that if I was forever going to avoid these words, that I was somewhat crippling my ability to express myself. I use those words in my private life. People I know do. They're valuable words for expression. They give spice and emphasis to language, and they, in the sense of comedy monologues, they can be very useful in giving characters, enhancing characterizations, and giving emphasis to ideas. So I didn't want to be crippled by not having them available to me. See, like, my point is, a person like Bill Cosby is forever forbidden now to use those words publicly because people don't expect it of him. I wanted to have the choice. I think you're freer when you have a choice. I think to not use them would have made me a form of restricted speaker, and I didn't want that. So I just decided to use them so they'd always be available to me.
But there weren't many comics using those words when you started.
No. Of course, you mentioned Lenny Bruce, who opened the door for that kind of language, but he didn't, so to speak, get away with it. They hunted him down and killed him, the Catholic Church and the police. So he was the one who opened the doors and paid for it. People like Richard Pryor and I and others who've come, Cheech and Chong and others who came afterward, were able to benefit from what happened to him and to be successful in spite of the language, not because of it.
So when you go on TV and you have to clean up your monologues, do you use different parts, or do you just take out the forbidden words?
No, I do things that don't require those words. I have the ability to find things in life that are humorous, that are gentle and somewhat innocent, and which can be expressed without using forceful or street language. So I use those things because I'm not on television to change their system. I'm there usually to promote myself. I do a trade-off with television. I use them and they use me, and I get what I want out of it, which is to mention some project I'm involved in. So I'm not there to change the system. I'm there to fit in for those few minutes, and I try to do that by using other humor that doesn't require this kind of forceful expression.